population. What do I mean by population? Each state receives a certain number of seats depending on their population count. How often do we take a look at population data? We take a look at it every 10 years through the census, which is actually happening this year. So make sure you get counted. And based on those numbers, that determines if a state either gains seats, lose seats, or remain the same. 10 years ago, we were fortunate here in the state of Florida to receive an additional 2 seats in Congress. What does that mean? That means we have more voting power in Congress, but that also tells us that people are actually moving to the state of Florida. I wouldn't necessarily say people are having more babies. I would say that people are migrating more so to Florida. And the number one reason why people migrate is for jobs. So that's a good sign. Every 10 years, as I stated before, seats are reallocated based on population and based on how many seats a state receives. That dictates how many districts they have and how many districts they may need to, create, add, or revise. All right, so I want to talk a little bit more about districts and districting later on, but just focus on the information and the unique characteristics about the House of Representatives. How many seats do we have? 435. Each member in Congress serves for 2 years. It's unlimited terms. I don't think any essay question will be focusing on qualifications, but the information is there. What we notice about the House of Representatives is that they represent a smaller group of individuals because they're representing a district. Media doesn't really pay attention to them. There are too many members to focus on. It's very formal, structured, due to the fact that it has a large number of members there. Let's move on. I want to talk about a very important concept called gerrymandering. I wouldn't be surprised if it comes up on the test in the form of a concept application question. If gerrymandering comes up, dealing with some U.S. Supreme Court cases like Baker versus Carr or Shaw versus Reno. But it's very important that you know what is gerrymandering. So students often mistake gerrymandering for redistricting. So let me break down what is redistricting first. Redistricting is when state legislators in every state redraw the lines to reflect changes in the seats that they've been given by the federal government. So for example, in 2010, the state of Florida received an additional 2 seats. That automatically meant that they had to redraw the lines to accommodate those additional 2 districts. That's it. Nothing else. Now, when does redistricting turn into gerrymandering? Gerrymandering occurs when state legislators redraw the lines, but pay attention. They redraw the lines in a way that gives someone or a group an advantage. That those groups usually involve political parties or even minorities, and individuals usually involve incumbents. Incumbents are individuals running for re-election. All right, so please don't get the two confused. Redistricting is when you're simply redrawing the lines. Gerrymandering is when you're doing it with a motive, a purpose. There's a hidden agenda. And you need to know the 2 court cases dealing with gerrymandering, which are Baker versus Carr, Shaw versus Reno. Information about those 2 cases are also in this PowerPoint. So, unique powers of the House of Representatives. What makes them unique? They're unique in that they initiate all tax and revenue bills, meaning they're the first house to deal with that legislation. But of course, the Senate will review, mark up, and also vote on that legislation as well. what makes them unique is that they initiate it, okay? They also have the power of impeachment. We've seen this in action this year with our current president. Our current president was impeached by the House, but he was not removed because the Senate has its own set of powers dealing with impeachment, where they must have a trial and then they then vote to determine if he should be removed. So can a president be impeached but not removed? The answer to that is yes. How many presidents have been impeached but not removed? We've had former President Bill Clinton, Andrew Johnson, and now President Trump. So we have had 3 presidents in U.S. history to be impeached by the House but not removed by the Senate. Some other things that are unique about the House of Representatives is that when they are in the process of approving and creating legislation, they have a committee that the Senate does not have, called the House Rules Committee. Now, if you can recall, we're dealing with 435 members, and these individuals represent different populations. So we need some type of formality, we need some structure when it is time to have a debate on a proposed legislation. So the purpose of the House Rules Committee is to set the time for debate, decide who can speak, and then determine the overall rules when debating is occurring. Now, this House Rules Committee, or this Rules Committee, once again, does not exist in the Senate, which is why it's considered to be very unique. Something else that is also unique is a strategy for during legislation called a discharge petition. So when I taught this course at the beginning of the school year, I walked you guys through the 6 steps for how a bill becomes a law. And the most difficult step to pass through is the step called committee action. This is when the bill is submitted to a standing committee, and at that time, that standing committee can mark up the bill, can revise the bill, and sometimes, depending on the nature of the bill, and it also depends on the members of that committee, that bill may die in committee action, which is also step 2 of the legislative making process. Now, how can you get that bill out of step 2? You request a discharge petition, which simply requires 218 signatures. You want those 18 signatures because 218 represents a majority in the House of Representatives. And if you are able to get 218 members of the House of Representatives to sign that petition, you essentially force that bill out of committee and it goes to the floor for debate. So the purpose of a discharge petition is to essentially save the bill, because when the bill is stalling or not making progress in committee action, in most cases, the bill will die. Let's talk about the Senate. We only have 50 states, and according to the Constitution, each state will receive 2 seats in the Senate. So that brings us to a total of 100. That 100 is not necessarily a fixed number. It's 100 because we only have 50 states. If Puerto Rico becomes a state in the future, then that number 100 will now be 102. Okay? So 100 is fixed based on the number of states. It can go up, it can decrease if states go up, or if states are eliminated, like North Carolina and South Carolina become the Carolinas. Get it? I didn't mention this, but I want to go back since we are talking about numbers. That 435 seats in the House of Representatives, that is fixed. That was fixed through a law called the Reapportionment Act of 1929, where we decided to no longer continue increasing seats in the House of Representatives. We're just going to lock it in at 435, and every 10 years, we'll just reallocate those seats. So we're never adding seats. We're never decreasing this number. If a state gains seats, that means there's a neighboring states losing seats. So when Florida was able to earn an additional 2 seats in the House of Representatives, some random state in this country saw a dip in their population, which resulted in them possibly losing 1 seat. Don't know the amount, don't know who lost it, but I just want you to understand the concept here that 435 never changes. We just reallocate based on population. So I just want to bring that up. All right, back to the Senate. So the senators represent the entire state, which explains why they have a much larger constituency. Constituents are the individuals that members of Congress represent. So senators represent a much larger group. I would even go as far as to say a much more diverse group as well. They have more staffers. The media focuses on them because I think they're a smaller group and they have some unique powers that automatically gives them that media attention, which I'll discuss really soon. 6-year terms. An amendment that I think all students need to know is the 17th Amendment. This amendment is very important in regards to the Senate because as a result of this amendment, citizens were now allowed to vote members to the Senate to represent their state. Prior to the 17th Amendment, state legislators of all states were appointing members to the Senate, but that appointment power also resulted in a lot of political corruption. So during the progressive movement, a lot of citizens voiced their demand to also have the power to elect not only members to the House, but also to the Senate. So what are some unique powers of the Senate? And once we go over those powers, you'll get a better understanding as to why the media focuses more so on the Senate as opposed to the House of Representatives. So what's unique about the Senate is that they're the House that confirms all presidential nominations. The president has the power to appoint and nominate federal judges, ambassadors, U.S. Marshals, and the one that gets a lot of media attention are Supreme Court justices. So they're confirming all of the president's nominations. They also have the power to ratify any treaties that the president proposes the United States enter in with another country. They hold the impeachment trials. As a result of them not having a rules committee, it allows members of Congress to engage in a debate technique called a filibuster, which I'll talk about later. But I just want you to see, what's unique about the Senate. They're confirming appointments. They have the power to ratify treaties. They hold impeachment trials. And then I want to kind of table the filibuster and hold for just a second. Let's talk about congressional leadership. You need to know your leadership positions because these leadership positions could come into play for your concept application essay. You have the Speaker of the House, which I believe is the most powerful person, not only in the House, but in Congress, because they're third in line for presidential succession. You have the President of the Senate, which most people don't know is actually the Vice President of the United States. He or she is barely there, and their only purpose is to break a tie if needed. Remember, you have 100 members. You may vote on the legislation where it's 50 in favor of it, 50 against it. The president of the Senate, aka the VP, is there to break that tie because he's technically not a member of the Senate because he wasn't elected to be a senator. He was elected to be vice president. Then you have your other leadership positions. You can see it on the screen. I don't want to walk you through it. You can read. But it's very important to know that all of these leadership positions, minus party whips, are held by members of the majority party. The majority party is the party that has the most members in both houses of Congress. So the majority party in the House of Representatives today are the Democrats. So the Speaker of the House is a member of the Democratic Party. And her name is, as we all should know, is Nancy Pelosi. On the other hand, the Senate is still dominated by the Republicans. So the Senate Majority Leader is a Republican. And it's really important to understand that parties control both houses, because with having members of the majority party have these leadership positions, they're able to drive the party's agenda more effectively. So I just want to recap. Speaker of the House, most powerful person in the House. Senate Majority Leader is actually the most powerful person in the Senate. A lot of students think that the VP is the most powerful person, but as you can see, he or she is never there. So how could you even be the most powerful person in that house? All right. So there's a lot going on in both houses, and a lot of that is based on the party that you're a part of, aka partisanship. Most of the work is done based on partisanship, and a lot of that work is done in small groups called committees. Party whips, I said I was going to go over it, but party whips, they play a huge role during the legislative making process because they're the ones whipping everyone into shape to ensure that everyone is voting based on what the party wants. All right, so let's talk about the legislative making process. We have two houses. The bill must go through both houses. All members of Congress should vote on that bill, and as long as the bill receives a majority vote in both, then the bill goes to the president. How many votes are needed in the House? 218. How many votes are needed in the Senate? 51. So let me go back, discuss how legislation is done in the Senate. So as we all know, debate is structured and very formal in the House. But in the Senate, it's very informal. In fact, there is no committee, there is no time frame, there's no time limit. And as a result of that, a filibuster could occur. What is a filibuster? It's when a member of the Senate decides to discuss the bill for an unlimited amount of time. The purpose of a filibuster, and this is really all you need to know, the purpose of a filibuster is to kill a filibuster. Okay? And the only way to stop someone from engaging in this technique is to vote in favor of a cloture. You can start debate in the Senate by requesting that the entire body vote in favor of a cloture, and if you receive the necessary votes for a cloture, then a filibuster cannot take place. Another method to kill a bill is to request a hold. Okay, what is a hold? That is when a senator prevents a bill from even being discussed. Okay, I just want to point that out. So the way bills become a law, my bad. What am I doing? I'm going forward. All right. So legislative making process can look very different. And what I'll go ahead and do is attach the PowerPoint that walks you through those steps. I don't think you really need to memorize each step, but if you just want a little refresher, I'll definitely include that for you to take a look at. But I just need you to know that a majority vote is needed in both houses for legislative approval. Most bills die in committee action. Bills are assigned to a standing committee, which is a permanent committee. that specializes in a particular area of policy, and standing committees have the power to edit, revise, or mark up bills. President can either sign the bill into legislation or veto the bill. And if he decides to veto the bill, he is basically rejecting the entire bill. Now, what can Congress do to counteract that veto? They can override the veto with a 2/3 majority vote. But the truth is that is very hard to do. It's damn near impossible to get 2/3 of the entire congressional body to override a president's veto. Remember, the president is also a member of one of the two major parties, so he's going to have his party members, his fellow party members, on the same page with him. So to avoid not getting that override, you're pretty much better off compromising with the president, working with the president. So when that bill reaches his desk, he'll sign it. All right, let's keep it going. Some important powers of Congress. Congress controls the money. Okay, that's why we often say Congress has the power of the purse. Congress collects tax dollars and they determine how it is spent by creating a budget annually with the president. Okay, that's where that interaction is coming in. So when they're collecting taxes, when they're creating a budget to decide on how they're going to spend those tax dollars, the president does come into play, and it can get messy depending on what type of government we have at the time. Do we have a divided government? Do we have a unified government? I'll talk about that later. Just to kind of stay on the same topic in regards to money, when they are making decisions on how to spend that money, they have to decide based on them establishing two spending categories. So within our budget, we have a discretionary spending category and we have a mandatory spending category. The only budget categories that's mandatory, meaning the only categories that Congress must allocate funding for, would be entitlement programs and interest payments on our debt. Okay, so we always have to pay our interest. But a lot of students are not familiar with entitlement programs. What are some entitlement programs? Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. What makes those programs entitlements? Because we agreed that they're entitled to it. We created a law. We actually have a separate tax for Social Security and Medicare. So if you're telling U.S. citizens, hey, pay these taxes, and when you reach a certain age, you are entitled to receive benefits from those taxes, it's mandatory now. It is mandatory that as the United States of America or the federal government has to allocate that money because you promised them that money. Okay, so that's why the majority of our budget goes towards mandatory spending categories. And the discretionary spending categories would be allocating money for the military, allocating money for education, which explains why there's barely any money in education. All right. Let's talk about war powers. Why would I bring up war powers? It's obvious that Congress has the power to declare war. It is expressed in Article 1 of our Constitution. But our Constitution also labels the president as the commander-in-chief. As a result of this, we often find these two branches clashing, okay? Because it's hard to decipher who's really in charge when it comes down to wars, okay? Most people assume that the president has the power to declare war, but you should know by now that Congress declares war, and the president acts as commander-in-chief, and for a very long time, the president has always sent troops to different areas of concern. I don't want to make this a U.S. history lesson, but some examples would be the Korean War, Vietnam, the war on terrorism, you get it? You usually see the president handing out commands because he's the commander in chief. Now, Congress has attempted to limit his powers through a legislation called the War Powers Act of '73, but I want to pause on this one and go into more detail about it when I go over Article 2, aka the executive branch, aka the president. Another power that people don't discuss, but it's major, is called Congressional Oversight. Okay, oversight simply involves Congress reviewing, monitoring, and supervising the other branches of government, specifically the executive branch. It's usually done in the form of hearings and investigative hearings where they may issue subpoenas and ask, members of various federal agencies or even citizens to come out and, testify and express some form of concern. Let's talk about members of Congress. Let's talk about those incumbents. How do incumbents stay in office? How do they win? Every 2 years, the same person is getting elected. Every 6 years, the same senators are receiving those necessary votes to remain in office. They're usually reelected because people recognize their name. They're able to raise more campaign dollars, so they're able to have a much stronger campaign presence against their opponents. They have experience. They have a track record where they can say, look, I did X, Y, and Z. And they're able to develop that record because they engage in something called pork barrel legislation. Pork barrel legislation is when members of Congress allocate funding specifically for their district and or state. And by allocating those dollars for their state, they're bringing jobs to the community, and the community gets all excited and they go, oh my God, thank you so much. You're reelected. All right. Now, how are they able to earmark those dollars? They also engage in something else called log rolling, aka vote trading, where, hey, vote in favor of this bill because I need this money, child. And the next bill that comes my way, if it's for you, I got you. So it's more of a, you scratch my back, I scratch your back. Did I say that right? I don't know, but you get it. Really good concepts. I think those are really good concepts. I'm going back that could be used in your concept application essay. You just never know. So take note of that. Voting behavior. All right. Voting behavior is when we discuss how members of Congress vote on bills. And I think most members of Congress, I don't think any member of Congress, or I hope not, any member of Congress can really be boxed in to one particular type of voting behavior. I think any good member of Congress has at some point demonstrated voting as a trustee or delegate. Depending on the nature of the bill, they may go with their own expertise, they may base their decisions on their own merits. And then on the next bill, they may vote based on the interests and needs of their constituents. Just know the different voting patterns that members of Congress could illustrate or, execute at the time. Let's go. So I was talking about types of government, and the type of government the type of government can really shed light on how effective a government is at the time or how stagnant a government can be at the time. So let's take a look at the difference between a divided government versus a unified government. A divided government involves a political party controlling one branch and the opposing party controlling the neighboring branch. So in this case, Congress may be controlled by the Democrats, but the executive branch may be controlled by the Republicans. That's a divided government. And we call it a divided government because our government, despite it being structured in 3 separate branches, those three branches must work together in order to get the job done. All right. So when you look at how a bill becomes law, the fact that the president has to sign that bill could either speed up the process or stagnate the process if it's a divided or unified government. So when it comes to legislation, I believe that it's easier for legislation to get approved and signed by the president if we are currently seeing a unified government, meaning the political party is dominating both branches of government. There's a Democrat-controlled Congress, and there's a president in the executive branch that is a member of the Democrat Party. Does that make sense? Now, what are we seeing today? It's really weird today because you have to remember, no political party has total control over both houses. So Congress is split. You have the House of Representatives that is currently under control by the House of Representatives, the Senate, which is under the control of the Republicans, and then our president, of course, is a member of the Republican Party. So I would consider this to be a divided government because everyone's not a member of the majority party. Yet both parties have some a little bit of domination in our government. So I mean, what are the pros and cons of having a divided government? Let's talk about the cons. A divided government can result in gridlock, stagnation. Things can't get done. It's difficult to pass legislation under a divided government, and it's also difficult to confirm appointments because remember, the president nominates, the Senate confirms. On the other hand, there could be some benefits behind having a divided government. By slowing down the process, you're basically allowing everyone to participate in that process. You're forced to now compromise more so with your enemy, who in this case would be your frenemy. Let's keep going. Checks and balances. This will be a major key on your concept application essay. Okay, remember on that concept application essay, you're going to engage in what I consider to be like problem solving. You will be given a scenario and you're going to need to address that problem. And the only way to address that problem is to understand how these three branches interact with each other. So what are some checks on Congress that can be done by the other two branches of government? The president can veto. That's a check. The president can issue executive orders. That's a check. The president can use the bully pulpit to influence you and I. Okay, that's a check. The Supreme Court could exercise that only power, but big power, called judicial review. That's a check. You need to know how each branch can check the other. Now let's jump into Article 2. I was hoping that these videos weren't so long, but it's taken a while. I'm at 35 minutes. I think I should stop and just create a whole separate video for the executive branch. So stay tuned.